Welcome to Semantically Imperfect, where we will identify, explore, examine, and navigate a plethora of topics concerning humanity and human development, moral discourse, parenting, and holistic health. I am yours truly, Semantic7. Peace, love, blessings in abundance. It's an honor and a privilege to be on this platform once again. It's an honor and a privilege to be in this safe, secure space with all you listeners. And it's an honor and a privilege to be the host of not only of this podcast, but of another Poetic Prose Monday. I like to express my gratitude for all of those who are tuning in from whatever listening platform, streaming device. I like to also express gratitude to our universe, to our creator, to whatever higher power that you believe in, giving us the resilience, the strength, the determination to be our very best each day, to live developmentally, and molding us and shaping us to fulfill our higher purpose and our higher will. Remember that in order for this podcast to become bigger, better, more reachable, more expansive, I need all of you listening to give us your feedback. And the way to give feedback is to first off, head over to IG and follow the page at semantically_imperfect. It's monitored 24 hours of the day. And essentially, there's no cost to you, no risk to you. We are a brand new podcast who want to hear from the people, because this podcast is for the people, to serve the people, and to serve the people honorably and with equity. Also, send any personalized comments, questions, general feedback, testimonies to the podcast's email. You can also send any essential question of the day, which is a question that we highlight each week, and we dive into its significance, its meaning, experiences that have gave us insight about the components, elements, concepts of the question. The podcast's email is poeticsemantics7@gmail.com. Also, subscribe to the podcast through Apple Podcasts, through Google Podcasts, through Spotify, iHeart. We're on all platforms. And head to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. Check those stars and give us a review. In order to be an effective purveyor of knowledge, in order to be a conduit for the people, serving the people based on the people's needs, we need to hear from the people being all of you. So please head to Help Apple Podcasts, send us a review, let us know about how the show is impacting your life, how you feel about the show, what it does to you mentally, emotionally, psychologically, practically. We want to know all of that. Every piece of information is helpful and it's appreciative, deeply. Now, how are all of you fine people doing today? What feelings are going through your mind and your body? What emotional reactions are flowing through your body, causing whatever feeling to be elicited and understood? Don't worry. I have emotions and feelings too. And I know that sometimes days can become very stressful and overwhelming. And it could lead to you lashing out. It can lead to you being impulsive, irrational, rash. It can lead to self-defeating beliefs, limiting beliefs, spiraling, racing, intrusive thoughts. Don't beat yourself up. You've already beat yourself up more than what you deserve. We are all flawed. We are all seeking to do our very best with what we know and what we have and what we have access to. So give yourself unconditional regard and grace, and stay focused on your dream. Stay focused on the values that give you fulfillment, contentment, excitement, exhilaration, and joy. Today, during Poetic Prose Monday, where we appreciate the art form of poetry, and I share a personal, emotional piece to all of you, and then break it down so all of you can understand and have a little bit more insight on the creative process, the creative problem solving that went into producing, um, conceiving, then producing the poem. This is an inside look. This is a front row. You get front row seats. And this is an opportunity from me to you to share what is important to me, what I value, and hopefully through that, something resonates within at least one of you and gets you to be more open, honest, and compassionate about your own life, about your perspectives, opinions, and ideologies, so that you can find deep, meaningful meaning and not only just your life purpose and your core belief systems and value systems, but who you are and how you identify yourself in this massive, chaotic, but also aesthetically beautiful world. Remember this month is National Poetry Month, all of April. So if you are a writer, a lover of the craft, if you're an educator, trainer, mentor, teacher, whatever space that you are in where you value and appreciate poetry, I encourage all of you to go read some beautifully crafted pieces. Go to a poetry slam competition. Go to a poetry reading at a local lounge or club. I know that there's still some COVID restrictions here and there, but it's way more open than it has been in the last 2 years. We donate money to poetry organizations and associations that preserve the art form through cultivating young, aspiring writers. And if you are willing, do some writing yourself. Touch the depths of what is bothering you. Touch the depths of who you are, who you want to be. Touch the depths of the emotions and feelings surrounding a particular event, circumstance, or situation. Talk about the conditions of the world. You can also do some storytelling. You could figuratively talk about a idyllic world that has the ingredients that you believe are useful and helpful. The list goes on. But this is for those that never really celebrated National Poetry Month. This is the time to be more attuned and be more aware that poetry is a critical fabric, not only in society, but also in modern art. That being said, I am going to now recite a poem titled A Moral Consequence. It's becoming harder to breathe as nation states and collective governments contest to siege, control and obliterate civilization in swifting speed. Anxiousness ensues as the military siege feeds off the wounded, bleeding from their hands to their feet, desperate for upside or reconciliation amid irrevocable catastrophe. The air is thin, filled with toxins and pollutants that can asphyxiate those involuntary in the crosshairs, seeking refuge and personal safety. Open doors, closed doors, and open border. Relegated inhabitants organized by race, gender, and class, while in the backdrop the cries of agony, grief, and bereavement permeates and settles as normal, ambient background noise. The curtains are wide open, and the luminous light of socio-racial strife shines bright. The scope of perspective is sharpened and focused, giving the observers of the world a front and centered view of what moral indignation looks and feels like. A moral consequence. When I take you guys to the very beginning, before I picked up my pad, before I picked up my pen, before this poem was even conceived. For those who don't know, I am in the military, but I have requested discharge through the conscientious objection claims process, and I am waiting for a final judgment, so to speak, to be authorized discharge and to be given the discharge date to separate from the Army. So over these last 12 years of military service, I have my beliefs, my moral principles and ethical virtues have changed drastically. I went from being a contributor of the war and terrorism where I never really had a concrete opinion or stance about our involvement and participation in Southwest Asia or even in the Middle East, in Iraq. I was one of those soldiers that really believed that I was achieving the highest level of excellence by defending the U.S. Constitution, by defending democracy, and by defending the American people. Over those 12 years, through provocative conversations with people that love me the most and care about my welfare, in particular, my wife and my sister-in-law. And I want to shout out to my wife, Ajane, um, at Zion1991 on Instagram. And then my sister-in-law, uh, Mecca. And she's also on Instagram too, if you're interested. Forgive me if I don't know if I don't know her right IG name, but if you type in Mecca JW, you'll find her. Those two resilient, bold, fierce Black women from the onset, after I came home, questioned me on just how I felt about things, and even started questioning me on my beliefs and opinions on the domestic issues here in America. And when I say the domestic issues, I'm referring to the overcriminalization of the Black community and people of color. I'm talking about the racial bias and the infliction of harm and brutality by law enforcement at a disproportionate rate. And for someone who had so much to say, so much to offer during my time deployed, here I am staying in the comforts of my own living room, and I don't have an answer to any of those provocative questions. So what essentially happened is I began to become curious and inquisitive about what I stand for, not what other people want me to stand for, not what other institutions want me to stand for, but what do I stand? What do I believe in? What do I value and hold true? This whole time I've had this utmost fidelity for the the government, for the Army, for the unit that I support and represent, for the military intelligence field. And this was the very moment where I realized that it was merely assimilation. that it really wasn't a wholehearted willingness, wholehearted, authentic willingness of cultural adaptation. So I know you're wondering, what did you do next? What does all of this have to do with today's poem and moral consequence? Well, I'll tell you. It took me about 7 years. It took me about 7 years from that conversation that left me speechless to go through a rigorous self-study of all of the greats in philosophy, in moral development and identity, psychology, the revolutionary movements in the 60s, and even listening to and reading about the luminaries during the Harlem Renaissance. And then when you couple that with trying to become more spiritually uh, enlightened, I started to research, analyze, and study transcendentalism, Rastafari, ancient African spiritual traditions. Because what I realized was that I was a mess. I predicated my identity based off of the military's ethos, value, and beliefs. I did not have my own. So eventually, within those 7 years, I was able to crystallize and formulate who I am, who I am, who I chose to be through my own free will and freedom of choice. And what I realized is that I am a conscientious person who believes in peaceability, harmony, cohesion, togetherness. And so after seeing what transpired in Ukraine and Russia, I felt impelled ethically and morally to write a piece that reflects the tragedy, the effects and implications of war. And then as the story started to uncover during this conflict, we also learned about how African higher ed students and even African families you know, Asian immigrants and other immigrants from different nations were being discriminated against and were being harassed and relegated as secondary citizens to those who look like good Christians and Europeans. So when you put all of this together, and the very underpinnings is a developmental, moral, ethical, spiritual journey that has led to the desire to want to live morally and ethically, and then seeing this via YouTube, news outlets, New York Times Magazine, independent news sources. All of this impelled me to share the wisdom and understanding and knowledge that I have gathered, not only just personally being in war, but through continuous investigation. That's how a moral consequence became a written piece that imitates the realities and the atrocities of armed conflict and the realities, atrocities, and the plight of those who are caught in the crosshairs as insignificant and inconsequential. I want to I want to share with all of you the quote of the day. In the very beginning, I mentioned something about dreams. And on another episode, we will talk more about having a dream, breathing and conceiving a dream, and having your life be guided by the dream. But right now, I want to leave this with all of you who are still listening to this podcast. In a speech, Martin Luther King, he posed the question, what happens to a dream deferred? And this is what he says. It leads to a bewildering frustration and corroding bitterness. I want to thank all of you for sharing this intimate, safe space with me. I want to thank all of you and express my gratitude for being your most emotional, vulnerable, and imperfect selves, and embracing that being imperfect does not mean that you're flawed or deficient. It means that through progress, improvement, you will flourish. thrive and strive in what you set your attention and what you set your and where you set your purpose. Remember to follow us on IG, semantically_imperfect. Send any personal inquiries, questions, feedback, essential questions of the day that you would like addressed to the email Poetic semantics7@gmail.com. Follow us, subscribe to the podcast on all platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, etc. And send us a review to let us know what we can do to improve and what we are doing to be supportive and helpful in your quest to become the better version of yourself, to become better than what you were yesterday, and helping you make it make sense. I'm Semantic7. This has been an honor and a privilege, and I can't wait for our next conversation. And I can't wait to be able to share with all of you insights, knowledge, and experiences. See you in the next episode.